The winter air on Wall Street had a bite as sharp as the angles of the glass and steel towers that clawed at the grey sky. It was a place of relentless forward motion, a river of dark suits, hurried phone calls, and the constant, percussive rhythm of expensive shoes on cold pavement. The city's noise was a symphony of ambition, a cacophony of sirens, horns, and shouted stock prices that drowned out anything gentle or slow. Here, value was measured in dollars and seconds, and anyone who couldn't keep pace was rendered invisible, just another piece of urban scenery to be ignored. On the marble steps of a grand financial institution, amidst the indifferent human current, a woman sat, a small, still island in a sea of urgency. Her exhaustion was a quiet protest against the world's frantic pulse, a silent testament to a life lived on the periphery of power. William Blackwell, a man forged in the crucible of this very environment, strode down the sidewalk with the kind of purpose that parts crowds. At 48, he was the picture of success, from his bespoke Italian suit to the heavy platinum watch on his wrist that was worth more than most people's homes. He was speaking into his phone, his voice a low, impatient growl as he dissected a trade that had gone sideways. His face, though handsome and well-groomed, was etched with a chronic fatigue that no amount of money could erase. He was a master of this universe, yet he was utterly alone in it. Each step he took was precise, calculated, moving him from one financial victory to the next, but he never looked up, never saw the faces he passed, never noticed the city's silent stories unfolding around him. One of those stories belonged to Eleanor Vance. At 70 years old, she had become a ghost in the city where she had once built a life. Her throne was the cold sidewalk, her sceptre a rickety shopping cart filled with the metallic clatter of cans and bottles. Her clothes were worn and simple, but meticulously clean, a small act of defiance against her circumstances. Deep wrinkles mapped a lifetime of smiles and sorrows on her face, but her eyes held a surprising clarity, a gentle sweetness that had somehow survived the harshness of the streets. She was invisible to the financiers and traders rushing past, a forgotten relic of a different, slower world. She watched the pigeons pecking at crumbs, offering them a small, tired smile, her spirit unhardened by a life that had taken almost everything from her. As William ended his call, his frustration palpable, he shoved his phone into the deep pocket of his overcoat. He moved with such abruptness that his expensive leather wallet, heavy with cash and cards, was dislodged. It fell without a sound, landing softly on the grimy pavement just a few feet from Eleanor's worn-out shoes. She saw it happen, her eyes widening as the small, dark rectangle came to rest. Her gaze flickered from the wallet to William's retreating back. Inside, she knew, was a fortune, enough money to grant her warmth, food, and safety for months. For one long, agonizing moment, a battle raged behind her weary eyes. Then, with a quiet resolve, she pushed herself to her feet. She picked up the wallet and tried to call out, but her frail voice was a mere whisper, instantly swallowed by the city's roar. William had already turned the corner, completely oblivious, leaving her with a choice that would define them both. You can only imagine the weight of that decision in her hands, a silent test of character that so often falls upon the most vulnerable. Sharing these profound moments of integrity is why we do this. And by subscribing, you help ensure that stories of quiet strength like Eleanor's continue to be heard. The journey to the police precinct was a slow, deliberate pilgrimage. Eleanor pushed her rattling cart along the crowded sidewalks, the clatter of cans and bottles a dissonant percussion against the city's hum. The wallet, tucked safely in her pocket, felt both heavy and light, heavy with the burden of another's life, light with the clarity of her own decision. Each step was a quiet affirmation of the values her parents had instilled in her decades ago, values that had survived poverty, loss, and the crushing indifference of the world. She ignored the sideways glances of pedestrians who saw only a vagrant, not a guardian of a small fortune. She walked with a purpose that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the person she was determined to remain, navigating a concrete world with a moral compass that pointed steadfastly true. Inside the precinct, the air was thick with the smells of stale coffee and anxiety. The desk sergeant, a man whose face was a permanent mask of weary cynicism, barely looked up as she approached. He listened to her simple explanation with an air of disbelief, his eyes darting from her worn coat to the expensive leather wallet she placed on the counter. He took it, opened it, and his eyebrows shot up as he thumbed through the crisp $100 bills. He counted the $2,500 twice, his professional skepticism warring with a grudging admiration. Looking at her again, this time with a flicker of genuine respect, he grunted, "You should wait. The owner will probably want to thank you." He gestured toward a hard plastic chair in the corner, a small island of stillness in the station's chaotic flow. Miles away, William Blackwell's world had ground to a halt. The discovery of his missing wallet sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic through his system, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his early days on the trading floor. It wasn't just the cash or the inconvenience of replacing credit cards. It was the violation, the feeling of losing control. He made a series of clipped, angry calls, his voice sharp with frustration. It was his bank that finally gave him a lead, informing him that his primary card had been reported found by the police. Relief was quickly replaced by profound irritation. He envisioned a labyrinth of paperwork and disinterested officials, another block of wasted time in a life measured by the minute. He grabbed his keys and headed for the precinct, his mind already rehearsing the impatient speech he would deliver. The precinct was exactly as he'd imagined, harsh, impersonal, and inefficient. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glare on the scuffed linoleum floors. He strode to the desk with the entitlement of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, presenting his identification and curtly explaining his situation. The sergeant listened, his expression unreadable, then slowly raised a hand and pointed toward the corner. "She's the one who brought it in," he said, his voice low. "Everything's still in there. Every last dollar." William's gaze followed the sergeant's finger, and for the first time he truly saw Eleanor Vance. She wasn't just a shape on the periphery or a piece of the urban landscape. She was a woman, sitting with a quiet dignity that seemed to absorb and gentle the harshness of the room. In that single, suspended moment, William's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. He saw the neatness of her worn clothes, the deep lines of hardship etched around her eyes, and the impossible clarity within them. The sergeant's words echoed in the sudden silence of his mind. She brought it in. He tried to reconcile the image of this woman, who so clearly had nothing, with the act of returning a sum of money that could have changed her life. The collision of her profound integrity with his own cynical expectations struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt a wave of shame so intense it was dizzying, a sudden, stark awareness of the moral desert his own life had become. He was looking at a ghost from a better world, a reflection of a goodness he thought had long since vanished. He walked toward her slowly, his usual confidence completely gone, replaced by a humbling sense of awe. He fumbled with the wallet, his hands unsteady, and pulled out a thick wad of bills. $300, $400, $500. He offered it to her, the gesture feeling clumsy and insulting even as he made it. "Please," he stammered, "you have to take this, for your trouble." Eleanor looked at the money, then back at his face, and offered a small, tired smile. She gently shook her head. "I only did what was right," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. The simplicity of her words, the purity of her refusal, was the final blow. In her, he saw the unshakable integrity of his late mother, and the wall he had built around his grief crumbled into dust, leaving him utterly exposed. This was the start of a seismic shift within him, a turning point he never saw coming. He couldn't just say, "Thank you," and walk away, back to his empty penthouse and emptier life. The thought was unbearable. "At least let me buy you a hot meal," he insisted, his voice now pleading, stripped of its usual authority. "A Belize." He saw her hesitate, a flicker of pride and mistrust in her eyes. He saw the weariness in her posture and a faint tremor in her hands that spoke of cold and hunger. For the first time, he wasn't closing a deal, he was trying to make a connection. The capacity for a person to completely change their path after a single encounter is a testament to the human spirit. Subscribing to our channel helps us continue to uncover and share these incredible stories of transformation. They ended up in a small, brightly lit diner a block away. The scent of coffee and frying bacon hung in the air, a warm, comforting blanket against the winter chill. The contrast between them was glaring. His tailored suit seemed out of place next to her simple, mended coat, and he felt the curious stares of the other patrons. For once, William didn't care. He was completely focused on the woman across from him, who held her warm mug as if it were a precious treasure. He asked her about her life, and slowly, like coaxing a shy bird, she began to share. She spoke of a life that had been chipped away piece by piece, a loving husband taken by cancer, a son who had moved west and fallen silent, and a small, cozy home surrendered to a mountain of medical debt. William found himself listening with an intensity he usually reserved for market analysis. He wasn't formulating a response or looking for an angle. He was simply absorbing the quiet sorrow and unshakable resilience of her story. He saw the ghosts of her past in the far-off look in her eyes as she spoke of her husband's garden, the pride in her voice as she described her son's high school graduation. In return, he found himself speaking of his own loneliness, a confession he had never made to anyone. He described the sterile silence of his apartment, the way the city lights felt accusatory rather than beautiful, and the hollow victories of a career that had cost him everything that truly mattered. In the shared space of a cheap diner booth, two profoundly lonely people found a moment of genuine connection. The impulse came to him suddenly, a thought so clear and urgent it felt like an order from his own soul. "Oh, come and stay with me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I have a big apartment, too big, so many empty rooms." Eleanor's eyes widened, and she immediately pulled back, her fragile trust evaporating. A wall of pride, her last and strongest defense, rose between them. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwell, but I am not a charity case," she stated, her voice regaining a measure of its lost strength. "I've managed on my own for this long." He saw he had made a mistake, framing his offer as a rescue when, in truth, he was the one who felt like he was drowning and she was the lifeline. The conflict hung thick and heavy in the air between them. He had to make her understand. Just then, she was seized by a deep, rattling cough that shook her small frame, a sound that spoke of more than just a simple cold. It was the sound of nights spent in the biting wind, of a body pushed far beyond its limits. His desperation grew. "This isn't about charity," he insisted, leaning forward, his voice low and earnest. "This is about me. My mother. She passed away a year ago. I was on a business trip. I wasn't there for her when she got sick, when she needed me." He finally voiced the guilt that had been poisoning him, the failure that haunted his every waking moment. He wasn't offering her a home. He was asking her to help him build one again. Eleanor looked at him, truly looked, and saw past the expensive suit and the powerful facade. She saw the raw, unhealed grief of a son who had lost his anchor. His pain was as real and as palpable as the cold that had settled in her own bones. In his eyes, she recognized the same profound loneliness that greeted her every morning and tucked her in every night. The obstacles, the social chasm between them, the judgment of the world, her own fierce independence, all seemed to shrink in the face of this shared human ache. He wasn't a benefactor looking down from on high. He was just another soul searching for warmth in a cold, unforgiving city. A silent understanding began to form, a fragile bridge between two strangers who desperately needed to find a family. The fragile truce between them, built over coffee and shared confessions, was shattered by the brutal reality of Eleanor's physical state. One moment she was listening, her eyes soft with a newfound understanding, and the next she was gasping for air, her face paling to a ghostly white. Her small body slumped forward, and William reacted with a speed he hadn't known he possessed, catching her before she hit the table. The diner's warm, comforting atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp sting of panic. He shouted for someone to call an ambulance, his voice cracking with a terror that was utterly foreign to him. As he held her, feeling the terrifying lightness of her frame, he was no longer a Wall Street titan. He was just a man, helpless and afraid, watching a flicker of light he had just found being threatened by an encroaching darkness. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile white corridors and the antiseptic smell of the hospital. William sat vigil by her bedside, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a torturous metronome, counting the seconds of a life hanging in the balance. He watched the steady drip of the IV fluid, a stark symbol of how everything essential was now beyond his control. All his money, all his power, could buy this private room and the best specialists, but it couldn't mend a body worn down by years of hardship. It couldn't erase the cold nights or the gnawing hunger. In the quiet hum of the machines, he saw the ghost of another hospital room, another woman he loved fading away while he was a world away, closing a deal. The crushing weight of his failure descended upon him, a guilt so profound it felt like a physical sickness. When Eleanor's eyes finally fluttered open, they found his immediately. He was still there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. He leaned forward, taking her frail, cool hand in both of his. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words raw and broken. "This is my fault." He finally let the dam break, confessing the story he had never told a soul. He spoke of his mother, of her quiet strength and unwavering belief in him, and of the business trip to Asia he had refused to cut short. He described the sterile, impersonal phone call informing him of her death, a moment that had hollowed him out and left him adrift in a sea of meaningless success. He wasn't just talking to Eleanor. He was speaking to the ghost that haunted him, begging for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. His voice grew thick with emotion, his grip on her hand tightening as if she were an anchor. "When I saw you, when you gave back that wallet, it was like seeing her again, her integrity, her goodness." He looked at her, his eyes pleading, stripped of all pretense. "You gave me back more than just some cash and cards, Eleanor. You reminded me of the man I was supposed to be, the man my mother raised. This isn't about charity, it's about me. I'm the one who needs help." He took a shaky breath. The vulnerability of his next words laid bare for her to see. "Please, let me take care of you. Let me have a family again." The request hung in the air, a fragile, desperate hope for a second chance he never thought he would get. Eleanor watched him, her own eyes filling with tears. She saw past the wealth and the power, past the guilt and the grief, and saw the profound loneliness of a lost little boy. She had spent years feeling invisible, a ghost in her own city, yet this man saw her more clearly than anyone had in a decade. He wasn't offering her a roof over her head. He was offering her a place in his heart, a space to heal alongside him. Slowly, with a strength that defied her frail condition, she squeezed his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 words. It was acceptance. It was forgiveness. In the sterile silence of that hospital room, two broken souls, a man who had everything and a woman who had nothing, finally found what they had both been searching for: a home. Eleanor's recovery was slow but steady, a gentle unfurling like a flower in the spring. When she was finally strong enough, she moved into William's penthouse, and the vast, silent space began to breathe for the first time. The sterile white walls, once a monument to his isolation, were warmed by the aroma of her simple home-cooked meals. She brought life to the windowsills with small pots of herbs and filled the quiet corners with the soft rustle of newspaper pages turning. Her presence was a gentle melody in the oppressive silence he had grown accustomed to. William would come home not to an empty echo of his own footsteps, but to the sound of quiet laughter as she watched an old movie, or the comforting sight of her sitting by the window, watching the city lights come on. The cold, minimalist showcase of wealth was finally becoming a home, filled not with expensive objects, but with the priceless warmth of companionship. The change in William was just as profound. He rediscovered a world beyond stock tickers and quarterly reports. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour, eager to share a meal and conversation with Eleanor. The gnawing guilt that had shadowed him for a year began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Inspired by her resilience and the systemic neglect she represented, he poured his resources and business acumen into a new venture. He established the Catherine Blackwell Foundation, named in his mother's honor, with a singular, ambitious mission to provide safe housing, comprehensive medical care, and a sense of community for the city's elderly homeless. It was no longer about accumulating wealth, it was about redistributing hope. He was finally honoring his mother's memory not with hollow success, but with the kind of compassion she had always embodied. 2 years later, a crowd gathered for the inauguration of the Foundation's first facility, a modern and welcoming care center named Eleanor's Haven. William stood at the podium, but his speech was brief, his voice filled with a humility no one on Wall Street would have recognized. The true guest of honor was Eleanor, who, looking healthy and radiant in a simple blue dress, stepped forward to cut the ceremonial ribbon. As applause filled the crisp autumn air, William watched her, his eyes filled with a love and gratitude that went beyond words. Seeing that moment, you understand how a single act of integrity can grow into a forest of kindness, sheltering so many from the storm. These are the legacies that truly matter, and by subscribing, you help us continue to share powerful stories that remind us of the good we are all capable of building. After the ceremony, they sat together on a bench in the center's new garden, watching the residents move in. A young, hurried woman in a business suit rushed past, her smartphone slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the walkway. Before William could even react, Eleanor pushed herself up with a gentle smile. She walked over, picked up the phone, and handed it back to the startled but grateful executive. She didn't wait for a thank you, simply returning to her seat beside William. He watched the entire exchange, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. The cycle was complete. He had lost a mother but found a family in the heart of a city built on relentless ambition. 2 lonely souls had found true wealth, not in a leather wallet, but in the simple, profound act of caring for one another.